It is now my great pleasure to introduce our ultimate provocation speaker, Zowie Broach, who moved so many of us profoundly with her talk at last year's Multilogue. Zowie Broach is head of fashion at the Royal College of Art in London, and since arriving there in 2015 and also through her own label, Boudica, she's radically changed the paradigm of what design and fashion might mean and how fashion can be learnt and how it can be used. Welcome, Zowie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you. So thank you. After 2 amazing days, I'm here to, I guess, end the powerful sessions that you've all been part of. So nearly 100 years ago, 23-year-old Heisenberg went to an island called Helgoland, the sacred island. This is where he qualified a key insight that underpins quantum mechanics. Quantum mechanics has clarified the foundations of chemistry, the functioning of atoms, of solids, of plasmas, the color of our sky, the dynamics of our stars, 1,000 aspects of our world today. Yet it remains profoundly mysterious, subtly disturbing. Where distant objects seem magically connected, matter is replaced by ghostly waves of probability. Is there a new way of speaking that implicates your body in everything on Earth? Asked Daisy Hildyard. She writes, climate change does create a new language in which you have to be all over the place. You're always all over the place. We evidently have different questions to ask and act upon, but we are connected. We are interconnected. The speed of light is the same for everyone. We sleep under the same moon. Visuals that connect us to our planet, our homes, our interconnected cells, human and non-human. Carlo Rovelli states, if the strangeness of quantum theory confuses, it also opens new perspectives with which to understand our reality, a reality that is more subtle than the simplistic materialism of particles in space, a reality made of relations rather than objects. So to be present in nearly 2022, we must connect with all that is invisible, hidden, and less certain. Quantum and its strangeness offers us a way to conceptualize the world in new ways, and Carlo Rovelli shares his vision that this is a reality made up of relations rather than objects. I believe some of our students are already intuitively creating work that explores through these thoughts.
I am aware that no one is aware. The only thing that comes to mind is desperation. It is from your perfect bosom the wildness of life that I waste and suck. In the stairs ahead is not bad luck, yet self-judge. Is with a dry mouth that I reach the top. Bravely awaiting for the dash against your intoxicating walk. Perhaps it's not sugar or salt, but just elongated features guard the line. I can only consume purity by recording you at night. Not your arms around. I understand that I don't understand myself. Fresh meat, pick and slice to feed a mouth that the only thing was guilty was to be awake just like me. Make me feel desperate again, my Lord. Take me again to that place of peace and insecurity. Give me a reason day. Wake up, Lord, it's you again that I needed more. Identities that mortal husk can understand the self.
Vandana Shiva states the way you design the world in your mind is the way you relate to it in the real world. An Indian scholar, eco-feminist, and anti-globalization author, environmental activist, and food sovereignty advocate, Vandana Shiva's thesis was on non-locality in quantum theory. And what she drew from her learnings was that non-locality, non-separation, and interconnectedness is the truest nature of reality. That there's no excluded middle, no duality. That we also realize that what appears different is actually different expressions of an interconnected reality. In Vandana Shiva's full presentation, she gives a clear history of India apartheid. She talks about economy as an art of living, noting that economy is oikos, in its origins of the word meaning home, and tells us to be aware of the coming economies that don't necessarily offer this interconnected sense, but pull us downwards and backwards. So in 2021, maybe we need to wade up river and create new vortices about our bodies, a new spirit that asks us to create from within, intuitive, connected, not to be aligned with the patterns that are so strongly marked in history and remain still today. New structures that are less preventative, more fluid vortex patterns of difference, ancient, intelligent, playful learning of self, others, and planet. Can we attempt to sustain a force, a fluid body of many that may influence each other, connect outward, and create change? What new aesthetic might arise from this vortex of disruption? What new aesthetic might develop from true collective wisdom? And yet there's an intense complexity of our world, where we are caught within our human timescale, the one in which we perceive. And whilst that makes our immediate community, equally, it can make us feel like we see nothing very clearly. Timothy Morton describes this as finding ourselves inside a gigantic iceberg, whose seeming transparency was simply a matter of our less than adequate eyes. The iceberg, the strange stranger, seen here in Chris Wainwright's work. Today, the Arctic are frontline territories in which the fate of ice will shape planetary futures, and Robert Macfarlane describes how they no longer move in silence, they surge, retreat, and vanish with disruption. Ian McGilchrist writes about the divided Western brain, that our left brain, the structured, more rational side, should be led by our right brain, the intuitive. But we are so overwhelmed and dominated today by the structures we live within, the non-living surfaces, straight lines, concrete masses, these completed aesthetics all about us, that the result is the left hemisphere has been externalized so much so that when the counterbalancing tendency of our right hemisphere checks in, well, it's less powerful, already subverted, numbed. In effect, our brain learnt to manipulate the world and not to truly understand it. Sadhguru, the yogi and visionary, tells us evolution is within our hands. He states that what you know is helpful, but if we want to understand, then we should accept we know nothing. Timothy Morton talks of hyper-objects, these substances and marks of our Anthropocenic era, capitalism, climate, cataclysmic shifts, catastrophic manufacturing systems, oil fields, oil slicks, wildfires, but also solar systems and black holes. He argues that our position in regards to these objects is like trying to get closer to the moon, running towards it, whilst forgetting that we are on the surface of the earth. But these objects, these hyper-objects, have a viscosity that is a direct product of increasing information, so sticky it can confuse us. The more data we have, the less we know, the more we realize we can never truly know as they fold over and about us. What is legitimate interest? How do we see what we don't see? How do we think beyond the programmed? How could and should intuition inform us today? So as we reach 2022, we are so globally super intelligent. Numerous schools across the world can claim amazing alumni. We have Nobel winners, Mercury Awards, Pulitzer Prizes, the Lubner Prize that tests us against AI using the standard of Alan Turing's test, which are all about human excellence, about what we have established as humans, who we are, our curiosity, expression, and discovery. So how come we are still so far from a powerful, beautiful place that respects not only our planet, but each other's cultures, disciplines, and views? Suzanne Simard asks us to re-envelop ourselves in nature, in the forest. The idea of a different set of visual vortices, a more random patternation, maybe one to establish a new vision, inset with new values, new trust, new behaviors, maybe to create numerous lines of flight, which also describes how particles move in quantum ways under the deep skin of the world, and how Deleuze described Guattari's writing, a generative tool that produced numerous lines of flight. Or super fine threads of hi-fi. The words used to describe how fungi spread out and create their mycelium network in subtle mutualism with others, whereby a molecular transmission might occur. Susan Simard recently shared, again, her research back from the 90s, but also the lack of acceptance and the long, tenacious struggle she went through for her work to be included. She talked about the fungi and the trees and how they forged their duality into a oneness, therefore by making a forest. And instead of seeing trees as individual agents competing for resources, back in the 90s, she discovered that the forest acted as a cooperative system in which trees talk to one another, producing a collaborative intelligence. She describes this as forest wisdom. Older trees nurture smaller trees. They recognize their kin acting as mothers. It's a world that moves from a free market to something more like a community with a socialist system of resources and redistribution. Suzanne Simard's works reveals a shimmering world. So could these vortex spiral patterns create new ways of describing and leading, building new disturbances, ancient, intelligent, playful learning within the rigid structures, lines of flight that reach between each young designer learning from each other, supported by mentors like the trees finding kin recognition, an exchange between the freedom of those without as yet their own imagined horizon and those who are at different stages of the human timescale, a knowledge between us rather than what we own, not solid or rigid, but flexible and fluid, soft, a vortex that might shift and change energies, values, and opinions. Metamodernism offered this idea of oscillation, but through the voices of Suzanne Simard, Timothy Morton, Vandana Shiva, Sadhguru, and Colaravelli alone, we begin to understand more of a mycelium, a collective vapor, a mist, intuitive, receptive, interconnected, emotional. I think it's our responsibility and privilege to create these most positive of spaces that allow a vulnerability, maybe even doubt, like a hand in a jar of honey, impossible to clean, deeply involved in each other's troubles, wrapped in and out of each other's learnings. Rivers disappear and so do stories, only to rise again in unexpected places. So human timescale has passed 55 years since the Black Panthers 10-point program, where they talked of freedom, destiny, employment, decent housing and shelter, education, free health, end to police brutality, fair justice, and control of modern technology. The Benin Bronzes, thousands of objects looted by the British troops back in 1897, what is now Nigeria. Prince Eden Akinsoya recently said, taking them away was like yanking off pages from our history. And a couple of weeks ago, Tristan Weber shared me the book, Can the Monster Speak? Only 2 years ago, this river rose up just before COVID, when Paul B. Prasadio, a trans man, spoke to an audience of academics and experts in their field of psychotherapy. They write, the traces of past life left in my memory have become more and more complex and interconnected, creating a collection of living forces such that it's impossible to say that only 6 years ago I was simply a woman and today I've become simply a man. I prefer my new condition as monster to that of man or woman because this condition is like stepping forward into the void, indicating the path to another world. Here I am not speaking of the living body as an anatomical object, but as what I call a somatek, a living political archive, interconnected. So we need to create turbulent vortices so that these stories, like rivers, rise once more until they are fully connected through all our societies, understood and included. We talked of the viscosity, of the materiality of our times, these strange strangers, often visible, withdrawn, as Timothy Morton describes the hyper objects of our time. And Donna Haraway calls to stay with that viscous trouble, like a hand in a jar of honey, impossible to clean. So I go back to Rilke, who wrote at the same time that Heisenberg was on the sacred island close to 100 years ago. Imprint this temporary, perishable earth into ourselves so deeply, so painfully and passionately that its essence can rise again invisibly inside us. We are the bees of the invisible. I would say we are the bees of the invisible, that we wildly collect the honey of the invisible, hidden, and less certain, and store it where it can become visible. Fashion is a catalytic practice. So I call upon these vortex, lines of flight, hi-fi mycelium possibilities. There's creative leaders. We can support an interconnected sense of reality and self across politics and society, emotion and being, where there is no excluded middle and no duality.
Distant past, a coming future. Body drift refers to the fact that we no longer inhabit a body. Rather, we occupy a multiplicity of bodies. Imaginary, sexualized, gendered, laboring, technologically augmented bodies. As Cam Barad says, touching the self entails touching the stranger within. Digital mysticism touches this primordial self and sees its deeply entangled link with the present. For I carry it with me, in a vessel, a woven carry bag. When thinking about digital mysticism and the stories it tells, I think of Ursula Le Guin's definition of science fiction carrier bag theory. Science fiction was a way of trying to describe what's in fact going on, what people actually do and feel, how people relate to everything else in this vast sack, this belly of the universe, this womb of things to be and tomb of things that were, this unending story.
So thank you, Renata, Francisca, for asking me and giving me this space to end the 2 amazing days. I'm just trying to articulate something that is way more than one voice. I'm also thankful for all those about me not listed here that are closer to me, who continue to share with me and inspire me. I'd like to end with how the day began with Yvonne Timoa's words. She shared with us about the African Ubuntu philosophy. I am because we are. Thank you.